The napkin is in a safety deposit box now. Laminated, if you can believe that. I laminated a cocktail napkin like it was a birth certificate, and I guess in a way it was one, because something got born on it in 2004 and it took 22 years for anyone besides me to admit that. I keep trying to figure out when I decided I was going to take the napkin instead of the check, and I can't find the exact moment. I've gone back over that dinner so many times it stopped being a memory and started being more like a movie I've watched too many times, where you know all the lines before they come. But somewhere between him saying, "I know I owe you," and the waiter setting down the second bottle of wine we didn't need, I already knew. I just hadn't told my hands yet. I don't know if you've ever sat across a table from someone you used to know completely, I mean completely, the kind of knowing where you can tell from someone's exhale whether they're about to laugh or cry, and realized you were now looking at a stranger wearing a very expensive watch. That's the specific kind of sick feeling I'm trying to describe. Not heartbreak, exactly. More like vertigo. Anyway. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because if I don't do this in order I'm going to lose the thread, and I need you to understand the whole thing, not just the ending, because everybody wants to skip to the ending and the ending isn't even the important part. Danny and I met in 3rd grade because he sat behind me and threw a wadded-up piece of paper at my head that had a drawing of a dog with a jetpack on it, and I turned around and said, "That dog would explode," and he said, "No it wouldn't, the fuel's on the outside," and that was it. That was the whole friendship, right there, in one exchange. He built things. I told him why they wouldn't work, and then, somehow, together, we made them work anyway. We grew up 4 houses apart on Larchmont, a street with too many potholes and a Baptist church on the corner that rang its bell wrong on purpose, I swear, just to mess with people trying to sleep in on Sundays. His mom worked doubles at the hospital. My dad fixed transmissions. Neither of our families had money, but neither of us noticed that the way you notice things later, once you know what money can actually do. By high school we were inseparable in that specific way 2 teenage boys are inseparable, which is to say we barely talked about anything real and communicated almost entirely through insults and shared silence in front of a television. He was better with his hands. I was better with numbers and with seeing how pieces fit. We didn't call it a partnership. We just called it Tuesday. His parents' garage had a workbench that his dad never used because his dad left when Danny was 11, and that workbench became ours by default, the way things become yours when nobody else wants them. We built go-karts. We built a pulley system to get snacks from his window to mine, which worked exactly once before it took out a gutter. We built, at 19, in the spring of 2004, a thing that didn't have a name yet, that started as an argument about how stupid it was that nobody had solved a very specific, very boring problem with inventory tracking for small hardware stores. His uncle owned one, and he'd complain about it every Thanksgiving, this same tired complaint about counting bolts by hand, and one night Danny said, half joking, "Somebody should just make a thing that does that for you," and I said, "What, like?" Automatically, and he grabbed a napkin off the counter because we didn't have paper close enough, and I started drawing. I remember the napkin was from a diner called Pete's that doesn't exist anymore. I remember it was thin enough that the pen almost went through it in a couple places. I remember my hand was cramping because I was trying to fit an entire flowchart onto something the size of a coaster, little boxes and arrows, this whole system for how the tags would talk to the base unit, how the base unit would talk to a screen, how you'd never have to count anything by hand again. I remember Danny standing behind me with his arms crossed, looking at it the way he looked at everything, like he was deciding whether to make fun of it. "Nobody's gonna buy this," he said. I want to be fair here. He wasn't being cruel. That was just how we talked to each other. You floated an idea, the other guy tried to shoot holes in it, and if it survived, it was worth building. I said something like, "Your uncle would buy it tomorrow," and he said something like, "Your uncle's not the market," and we argued about it for maybe 20 more minutes and then his mom got home from her shift and we had to clean up because she hated clutter on the counter, and I folded the napkin in half and stuck it in the drawer under the phone book, and that was that. 19 years old. We went back to playing video games. I didn't think about that napkin again for a long time, not really, not in any way that felt significant. It was just a thing we doodled, one of 100 things we doodled, most of which went nowhere, because that's what most ideas do. Here's the part one need you to sit with, though, because it matters for what happens later. My mom took a picture that night. Not of the napkin, of us, being teenagers, being loud, her rolling her eyes at us from the kitchen doorway with her phone up. It's a bad picture. Blurry, half of Danny's face cut off, my mouth open mid-sentence. But the napkin is on the counter in the background, face up, my handwriting visible if you zoom in close enough, and the phone time-stamped it the way phones do, automatically, without either of us asking it to. I didn't know that photo would ever matter. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't building a case in 2004. I was a teenager who liked his friend's mom's cooking and didn't want to get yelled at for leaving napkins on the counter. This is who we were, and then life did what it does, which is happen to you slowly and then all at once. I went to state school for accounting because it was cheap and my dad said a man should have a trade even if the trade is numbers. Danny bounced around, a semester here, a semester there, a stint doing IT support for a company that made vending machines, which, in retrospect, is almost funny, given what came next. We stayed close for a few years. Standing order Thursday wings. His wedding, where I was best man and gave a toast that made his mother-in-law cry, in a good way, I think. My divorce, 4 years later, where he was the only person who didn't ask me what I did wrong, just showed up with a case of beer and sat on my new, terrible, second-hand couch and didn't say much of anything, which was exactly right. Somewhere in there, I genuinely can't pin the year, and that bothers me more than it should, the calls got shorter. Not fewer, at first. Just shorter. And I told myself that's what happens. People get busy. He had 2 kids by then, I had a job that ate weekends, and Thursday wings became, let's get wings soon, became a text on my birthday, became nothing in particular, became the specific kind of nothing where you don't notice a friendship has gone quiet until you try to think of the last real conversation you had and you can't find one. I should have noticed a few things sooner. He stopped asking about my work, for one, which used to be a whole ritual. He liked asking me dumb hypothetical accounting questions just to watch me get worked up explaining depreciation schedules to someone who didn't care. He started being vague about what he was working on. Just a project, he'd say, when I asked, and I let it go, because you don't inventory a friendship when you think you still have plenty of it in the bank. Here's where I have to tell you about the 3 things I explained away, because that's the part that still makes my stomach hurt more than anything that came after. The first was small. A LinkedIn post, 2016 or so, from a name I didn't recognize, Danny's old vending machine boss, actually, congratulating him on the launch. I clicked through out of curiosity more than anything, and there was a product photo, a little screen, a base unit, a tagging system for retail inventory, and something about it looked familiar in that itchy way where you can't place why, and I thought, and then I thought, that's a pretty common kind of product. Actually, there's probably a dozen companies doing something like this, and I closed the tab. The second was 2 years after that. Danny mentioned, kind of sideways, at a barbecue I almost didn't go to, that he'd started a little thing, inventory software, boring stuff, and when I asked what it did, exactly, he changed the subject to my kid's baseball season so smoothly I didn't even register it as a dodge until I was driving home. I remember thinking, that's not like him, he usually can't shut up about what he's building, and then I thought, people change, and I turned up the radio. The third one, I can't explain away even now, and it's the one that keeps me up. My sister came to visit and I showed her, almost as a joke, the LinkedIn post, said, "Isn't that wild, remember that thing me and Danny used to talk about in his garage," and she looked at it for a long time and said, "Wait, didn't you draw something like that? On a napkin? I remember you telling me about that," and I laughed. I actually laughed, out loud, at my own sister, and said something like, "Everybody's got a napkin idea, Steph, that's not the same thing," and she gave me this look, not convinced, just quiet, and I changed the subject, because it was easier to be annoyed at her than to sit with what she'd said. I want to be clear I wasn't stupid. I want to be clear I wasn't in denial the way people are in denial about a spouse. It was smaller and dumber than that. It was just, you don't want to believe your best friend since third grade did that to you, so your brain does this incredible, embarrassing amount of work to make sure you don't have to. The pressure built slow. That's the only way I can describe the next stretch, for 5 years, where I started doing things I wouldn't have admitted to anyone, least of all myself. I'd search his company's name, it had a name by then, a clean one-word tech name, the kind that sounds like it was generated by an algorithm designed to sound trustworthy, and read every press mention. I told myself it was just curiosity. Old friend pride, even. Look at Danny go. But I also, one night, 3 drinks in, pulled a printout of their patent filing, because it turns out patents are public record, and you can just read them, sitting on your couch at 11:40 on a Tuesday, and I read the claims section 4 times, and my hands were doing something I didn't tell them to do, this low, steady shake, because the language in there, not word for word, nothing that clean, but the architecture, the logic of it, tag talks to base unit talks to screen. Was the argument we had over a diner napkin when we were 19 years old. I told myself patents get filed on obvious ideas all the time. I told myself I was pattern matching because I wanted to find something. I put the printout in a drawer and didn't look at it again for 8 months, and I didn't tell anyone I had it. There was a work dinner, my company's holiday party, where his name came up because someone had read an article about self-made founders under 50, and I laughed along and said something proud and easy about knowing him since we were kids, and then I went to the bathroom and stood in the stall for longer than I needed to, just breathing, and I don't fully know why. I started a folder on my laptop. I called it Old Stuff, which in hindsight is the least suspicious, most boring name I could have picked, and I don't know why I picked it, except that I didn't want to see a folder called anything more honest sitting on my desktop every day. Into it went the patent printout. The old LinkedIn post, screenshotted. And then, one Sunday, going through a box in my mom's garage that she'd been asking me to deal with for 2 years, old yearbooks, a busted Walkman, a shoebox of photos she hadn't gotten around to putting in an album, I found the picture. The blurry one. Us at the counter, the napkin face up behind us, time-stamped by a phone that didn't know it was making evidence. I sat on the floor of my mother's garage for probably 20 minutes with that photo in my hand. I didn't cry. I want to say I cried, because it would sound better, more like a real moment, but honestly I just felt very still, and very tired, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I still hadn't decided anything. I want to be honest about that too. I told myself I was just being thorough. Just getting things organized. Probably smart to have copies of old photos anyway, right? That's just good practice. I wasn't building a case. I was just, apparently, getting ready for one, without admitting that's what I was doing. The dinner happened on a Thursday in March, which felt almost like a joke, given our old standing order. He texted me out of nowhere, first text in over a year, and said he wanted to catch up, that there was a place downtown he wanted to take me, his treat, and something in me wanted so badly for it to be simple that I said yes before I'd let myself think about it. The restaurant had a name I couldn't pronounce right and a menu with no prices on my side, which I've since learned is a thing rich people do to their guests, apparently, so you don't feel weird about ordering the good steak. He was already there when I walked in, and I almost didn't recognize him for a second, not his face was the same, just older, but everything around it. The watch. The way he sat, like the chair belonged to him personally. The way the waiter knew his name. We did the small talk. Kids, my divorce, his knee surgery. It was almost good, for about 15 minutes, almost like we were just 2 guys again, and I let myself believe it for those 15 minutes because I wanted to, God, I wanted to. Then he set his fork down in that specific way people set things down right before they say something rehearsed, and he said, I know I owe you an explanation. Maybe more than that. I didn't say anything. I've since read that silence makes some people talk more, fill the space, and I don't know if I did that on purpose or if I just genuinely had nothing to offer him in that moment, but he kept going, and it came out in this smooth, practiced way that told me he'd said some version of it before, maybe to a therapist, maybe to his wife, maybe just to a mirror. He said things got complicated after the vending machine job, that he'd taken the base concept and developed it independently, that the version I remembered from the garage was basically nothing, just a conversation, not real IP. He said the company almost failed twice and he'd mortgaged his house, twice, to keep it alive, like the suffering he went through afterward retroactively made the beginning his alone. He said he thought about calling me so many times, and didn't, because he didn't know how, because too much time had passed, because he was scared of what I'd say. And then he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, and he slid it across the tablecloth, and he said, "I know money doesn't fix it. But I want to make this right. Let's put it behind us." I looked at him. I looked at the watch, which I later found out cost more than my car. I looked at the suit, which fit him in that way that only happens when someone's paid to make sure it does. I looked at his face, doing its careful, sorry expression, and I thought about a 19-year-old kid in a garage saying, "Nobody's gonna buy this," with his arms crossed, and something in my chest went very quiet and very cold, the kind of cold that isn't rage, isn't even really sadness. It's more like clarity. Like a fog lifting off a road you didn't realize you'd been driving blind on. I didn't open the envelope. I still don't know how much was in it. People ask me that constantly and I genuinely have no idea, and I think that surprises them more than anything else in this whole story. I asked him one question. I said, "Do you remember whose handwriting was on the napkin?" He got very still. And that stillness told me everything the envelope was trying to buy silence about. I stood up, and I didn't take the check, and I didn't take the money, and on my way out I don't even fully remember deciding to say it, but I said, "I'm not selling you my name for the price of a nice dinner," and I left him sitting there with an envelope on a white tablecloth and a waiter hovering awkwardly by the kitchen door, unsure whether to bring the dessert menu. I'm not going to pretend the lawsuit was clean or noble the whole way through, because it wasn't, and if I tell it like it was, you'll know I'm lying, and I need you to believe the rest of this. It took 3 years. 3 years of depositions in windowless rooms, of a lawyer named Priya who I will be grateful to until the day I die, of Danny's team offering me more money at every single stage, first 6 figures, then, 18 months in, an offer that made my accountant physically gasp on a phone call, 7 figures, enough to make my divorce lawyer's fees look like a parking ticket. I said no every time, and every time it got a little easier to say, which surprised me, because I expected it to get harder, the way temptation is supposed to wear you down. It didn't. It got clearer. I wasn't suing for money. I want to say that plainly, because everyone assumes there's a hidden number I was actually after, some secret price where I would have folded, and there wasn't. I told Priya, early on, that I wanted $1 in damages and my name on the patent as co-inventor, and she looked at me like I'd told her I wanted to negotiate in crayon, and then, after a while, she stopped looking at me like that. It cost me things. It cost me a relationship I was in at the time, because she said, not unkindly, that she was tired of being with a man who talked about a napkin in his sleep. It cost me 2 years of not sleeping right, of checking my email at 2 a.m. for updates that never came at 2 a.m. It cost me the last shred of whatever version of Danny I'd been keeping alive in my head, the 3rd grade one, the one who threw a paper dog at my head. That kid was gone the moment the first settlement offer came in with a non-disclosure clause attached, because that told me what he actually wanted, not to make it right, just to make it quiet. There was a deposition where his lawyer asked me, kind of smug, kind of bored, whether I could really prove the napkin sketch was materially foundational to the eventual patent, and I watched Priya pull out enlarged photos of the sketch beside the actual patent diagrams, side by side, and I watched something shift in the room, this small, satisfying deflation in the lawyer's posture, and I felt, for about 4 seconds, genuinely good. I want to be honest that those 4 seconds mattered to me more than they probably should have. We won. Not big. $1 in damages, like I asked. But the judge ordered correction of inventorship on the patent, which is the part that actually mattered, the part money can't undo. My name went on it. Not in collaboration with, co-inventor, in the official record, permanently, the kind of permanent that outlives both of us. I thought I'd feel like I won. Everyone kept telling me I won, my sister, my lawyer, a cousin I hadn't talked to in a decade who saw a small article about the case and texted me a fire emoji, which, honestly, was a strange thing to receive. And on paper, I did win. But I drove home from the courthouse that day and sat in my car in my own driveway for probably 15 minutes with the engine off, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like someone who'd finally set down something heavy and discovered his arms had forgotten how to hang normally at his sides. I heard, a few months later, secondhand, through someone who used to work with him, that Danny was trying to sell the company. Some bigger firm sniffing around, the kind of deal that would have set him up for 3 lifetimes. And the deal fell through, not because of the dollar, obviously, nobody cares about a dollar, but because due diligence turns up everything, including a co-inventor of record who's never signed away his rights and has no plans to. Turns out you can't cleanly sell a company built on a patent with an asterisk that says, and also this guy, not without that guy's signature, and I have no plans to give anyone my signature. He's called twice since. I didn't answer either time. I don't know if I ever will. I still have the napkin, laminated now, sitting in a box that also has my kid's first pair of shoes and a photo of my dad's transmission shop, which shut down years ago, which is its own kind of grief I'm not getting into tonight. I don't look at the napkin often. But sometimes I take it out, and I look at that shaky 19-year-old handwriting, the little boxes and arrows I drew because I didn't have a real piece of paper handy, and I think about a version of that night where his mom got home 2 minutes later and we kept arguing about it, and maybe we build it together, actually together, and maybe none of this happens. I don't know if that would have been better. I genuinely don't.